Well, the crown jewels will be seen by a global TV audience of billions during the coronation, but a long-running dispute over the precious stones has flared up again. Some activists in South Africa say several of the diamonds were looted and must be returned.
King Charles just did the unthinkable. A jaw-dropping scandal inside Buckingham Palace has left the entire royal family in shock, and nobody is talking about it.
Phil, I would say that there are a lot of historical complexities that surround the core for the return of the diamonds.
A priceless jewel vanished. Secret journals were stolen. And a midnight phone call exposed a betrayal so close to the throne that it changed everything. What King Charles discovered sent shockwaves through the monarchy, and his response was something nobody expected. The truth behind closed palace doors is far darker than the headlines suggest. You will not believe who was involved. Stay with us, because this story is about to get a lot more shocking. There are institutions in the world that have survived wars, political upheaval, public scandal, and the relentless pressure of a changing society. The British monarchy is one of them. For centuries, it has adapted, endured, and maintained its place at the centre of national life in the United Kingdom. It has weathered moments of crisis that many believed would bring it down for good. And each time it has continued. But every so often, something happens behind the walls of Buckingham Palace that tests the foundations of that institution in ways the public rarely gets to see. Most of the time, those moments stay hidden. The palace is extraordinarily good at managing its image, controlling information, and presenting a composed and unified front to the world. That is simply how the royal household has always operated. Discretion is not just a preference inside those walls, it is a way of life. So when reports began to emerge in May of 2025 suggesting that something had gone seriously wrong within the royal household, the level of public attention was immediate and intense. These were not vague rumours passed along by anonymous sources with unclear motives. According to multiple reports, the situation involved missing items from the royal collection, a security investigation conducted inside the palace itself, and a decision by King Charles III that reportedly had significant consequences for those closest to him. The details, as they gradually became known, pointed to a chain of events that had been unfolding quietly for nearly 2 weeks before any of it reached the public. At the heart of the story were objects that carried weight far beyond their material value. The items in question were not simply expensive possessions locked away in a palace vault. They were pieces of history. Specifically, the reports centered on personal belongings that had once been owned by Queen Elizabeth II. Items that had been placed under the protection of the Royal Collection Trust following her death in September 2022. Under the rules that govern such things, those belongings were subject to strict legal and constitutional protections. They were not to be moved, examined, or accessed outside of official procedures. That framework exists for good reason. The Royal Collection is not simply a private family inheritance. It belongs in a meaningful sense to the nation and to the historical record. Among the items that sources described as missing were pieces with deep emotional and ceremonial significance. One was a brooch closely connected to a milestone in the late Queen's reign. Another was a double-strand pearl necklace that Queen Elizabeth II had worn publicly during one of the most somber moments in recent royal history. These were not decorative objects sitting forgotten in a storage room. They were items that had been present at defining moments of the modern monarchy. Their absence from the secured vault, once it was discovered, triggered a level of alarm inside the palace that insiders described as exceptional. People who work within royal institutions are trained to remain calm and professional under pressure. But the discovery of missing items from the royal collection, particularly items with that level of historical significance, is the kind of thing that produces real urgency. What made the situation even more sensitive was the additional report that 2 personal journals written by Queen Elizabeth II were also unaccounted for. These were not official records or ceremonial documents. According to sources familiar with the investigation, these journals had been written during the period of the global lockdown, a time when the late Queen, like much of the world, had been isolated from normal public life. The writings were described as deeply personal, containing private reflections that she had never intended for public consumption during the lifetimes of her family members. Under the terms governing the royal collection, those journals were sealed for close to a century. The intention had always been that they would only be opened by a future generation. one with enough historical distance to read them without the complications that come from personal connection to the events and people described within them. The fact that such documents had apparently been removed from the vault added a different dimension to what might otherwise have been treated as a straightforward security matter. Jewelry, however significant, exists in a realm that can at least be discussed in terms of inheritance and possession. Personal writings are something else entirely. They represent a person's private voice, their unfiltered thoughts, their honest reflections on the people and circumstances around them. The idea that such materials had been disturbed, removed from the place where they were supposed to remain untouched for generations, was something that many observers found deeply troubling once the details became known. Reports also pointed to the broader atmosphere inside the palace during the days that followed the initial discovery. Sources described a mood of unusual tension, with private meetings being held behind closed doors and a general sense among staff that something significant was being handled at the highest levels. In an environment where routine and ceremony provide a kind of anchor to daily life, any disruption to that rhythm tends to be noticed quickly. People who work within the palace are not insensitive to the atmosphere. They can tell when something has shifted, even when nothing is said directly. And in this case, the shift was described by those familiar with the situation as more pronounced than anything seen in recent memory. King Charles III, who has been on the throne since September 2022, following the death of his mother, found himself at the center of all of it. The reports suggested that once the full picture of the missing items became clear, the king moved to address the situation directly and without delay. What that response looked like in practice and where it ultimately led forms the core of everything that followed. But even at this early stage, before the investigation had run its course and before any confrontations had taken place, the situation raised a question that would continue to hang over the story as it developed. The British monarchy has faced scandals before. It has survived moments of public doubt, family conflict, and serious institutional pressure. But what happens when the disruption does not come from outside the institution, but from within it? What happens when the people closest to the crown become part of the problem rather than part of the solution? Those questions do not have simple answers. They never do when the stakes are as high as they are inside an institution that has stood for centuries. But they were very much present in the air during those early days of May 2025. As the palace quietly worked to understand exactly what had happened, who was responsible, and what the appropriate response should be. The answers, when they came, would prove to be more dramatic than almost anyone had anticipated. The discovery that set everything in motion did not come from a senior official or a security specialist. It came from a member of the palace household staff, someone who had spent years working in the private, residential wing of Buckingham Palace and who knew those rooms well enough to notice when something was not quite right. Her name, according to sources familiar with the events, was Eleanor Hartridge. She had worked in that part of the palace long enough to know the details of every room she was responsible for, the position of furniture, the contents of drawers and cabinets, and the general state of things as they were supposed to be. That kind of familiarity, built up over years of quiet, careful work, is precisely what made her the person who spotted something that others might easily have overlooked. The moment itself was unremarkable on the surface. Eleanor was carrying out a routine task, tidying a bedroom within the private residential wing that was used by members of Queen Camilla's family. It was the kind of work she had done countless times before, methodical and familiar. But during the course of that work, something caught her attention. Beneath a wardrobe, pushed toward the back and slightly out of alignment with its surroundings, was a small jewelry box in the shape of a rabbit. On its own, that might not have seemed significant. Personal objects are kept in bedrooms, and a decorative jewelry box is not an unusual thing to find. But something about its position and the way it had been tucked back against the wall gave her pause. When she picked it up, the weight of it surprised her. It was heavier than she expected for something of its size, and as the light from the window fell across it, she noticed what appeared to be a faint seam running along the base. Carefully, she pressed along the lining of the bottom, and with a soft movement, a hidden compartment opened. Inside, wrapped with some care, was a piece of jewelry that she recognized, or at least recognized as something that did not belong, tucked away in a hidden compartment inside a bedroom wardrobe. It was a brooch set with a sapphire, and it matched the description of an item that had recently been flagged as missing from the royal collection. Specifically, it appeared to be the Sapphire Jubilee brooch, a piece closely associated with Queen Elizabeth II and worn by her during the celebrations marking her 65th year on the throne. Eleanor reported what she had found through the proper internal channels, as palace protocol required. Within a short period, a royal jeweler examined the piece under controlled conditions and confirmed that it was authentic. It was the exact item that had been reported missing. That confirmation shifted the situation immediately from a matter of concern into something considerably more serious. The brooch had not simply been misplaced or moved to a different part of the collection. It had been found concealed inside a hidden compartment in a private residential bedroom, inside one of the most secure and closely managed buildings in the United Kingdom. The implications of that were not lost on anyone involved. To understand how the brooch came to be, there in the first place, it is necessary to go back approximately 10 days before Eleanor made her discovery. It was during that earlier period that the chain of events had actually begun. Royal Treasurer Donald Walton arrived at Buckingham Palace carrying the findings of a routine quarterly audit of the secured Treasury vault. The audit was standard procedure, the kind of review that happens regularly to ensure that the contents of the vault are properly accounted for and that nothing has been moved or altered outside of authorized channels. On this occasion, however, the findings were far from routine. Several personal possessions belonging to Queen Elizabeth II were missing. The list included the Sapphire Jubilee brooch, the double-strand pearl necklace she had worn during Princess Diana's funeral in 1997, and 2 leather-bound journals that the late Queen had written during the months of the global lockdown. Each of these items was significant in its own right. The brooch and the necklace carried historical and ceremonial weight, but the journals represented something of a different order entirely. As described by sources close to the investigation, they contained private reflections that Queen Elizabeth II had never intended to be read by anyone during the lifetimes of her family. Under the rules of the Royal Collection Trust, those journals were sealed for close to a century. Their removal from the vault was not simply a breach of protocol, it was a breach of a legal and constitutional framework that existed specifically to protect the integrity of the late Queen's personal legacy. King Charles responded to the audit findings by ordering a quiet internal investigation. The matter was handled with a high degree of secrecy, which is consistent with how the palace tends to approach sensitive internal situations. The investigation was placed in the hands of Sir Clement Meister, described by sources as a trusted figure with a background in intelligence work, someone with both the experience and the discretion required for a task of this nature. His mandate was to determine how the items had been removed, who had been involved, and what had actually happened inside that vault. The first significant breakthrough came when security logs from the early hours of April 27th were reviewed in detail. Those logs showed that a palace guard named Robert Hulton had entered the Treasury area at 3:49 in the morning, nearly 2 hours before his scheduled shift was due to begin. And access at that hour, outside of any official duty, was immediately irregular. When Hulton was questioned by investigators, he initially maintained that nothing out of the ordinary had taken place. But as the questioning continued, his account changed. He acknowledged that he had accessed the restricted vault area that morning, and he explained that he had done so after receiving a phone call through an internal palace line. According to his account, the caller had known personal details about him and had referenced sensitive information concerning his family. The caller had implied that they held authority within the royal household, and they had offered financial assistance to help cover the costs of medical treatment that his wife required. Hulton maintained throughout his questioning that he had believed he was acting on legitimate instructions. He also insisted that he had not personally removed anything from the vault during that visit. Whether or not that specific claim was accepted by investigators, his account provided a critical piece of information. Someone had contacted him through an internal palace phone line in the middle of the night and instructed him to grant access to a restricted area of Buckingham Palace. Sir Clement's team traced that internal phone call. The process of doing so in an environment as carefully managed as Buckingham Palace was methodical rather than straightforward, but the result was unambiguous. The call had not come from outside the building. It had originated from within the palace itself. More specifically, the signal was traced back to the private residential wing used by Queen Camilla. There were no signs of a forced entry into the vault. No alarms had been triggered, and no locks had been broken. The vault had been accessed normally by someone who either had proper authorization or had been allowed in by someone who did. What had looked at first like a possible external security breach was beginning to look like something that had been arranged from the inside. That realization fundamentally changed the nature of the investigation. It was no longer simply a question of missing items and an irregular access log. It was now a question of who, within the innermost circle of the royal household, had been involved in removing historic items belonging to the late Queen from a secured vault in the middle of the night. And the evidence that had been gathered was pointing in a direction that no one involved in the investigation could have found easy to follow. There are moments in any institution when the evidence gathered through careful investigation must be brought into the same room as the people it concerns. Those moments are rarely comfortable, and they are almost never simple. In an ordinary organization, such a confrontation might involve a manager and an employee, or a board of directors and a senior executive. But when the institution in question is the British monarchy, and when the people in the room include a reigning king and his wife, the weight of such a moment is of an entirely different magnitude. What took place inside Buckingham Palace on the afternoon following Eleanor Hartridge's discovery was precisely that kind of moment. And by all accounts, it was one that none of those present will forget. The meeting took place in the Palace War Room, a space historically associated with serious internal deliberation and decision-making at the highest level of the royal guards household. The heavy oak doors were closed behind those who entered. Present at that meeting, according to sources with knowledge of the events, were King Charles III, Prince William, Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Queen Camilla. The gathering of that particular group of people behind closed doors in that particular setting was itself an indication that whatever was about to be discussed was not a routine matter of palace administration. These were the senior members of the royal family, and they had been brought together to confront something that had been quietly building for nearly 2 weeks. King Charles opened the meeting by laying out what the investigation had uncovered. He went through the findings methodically, describing the missing items, explaining the results of the security log review, and detailing the conclusion that investigators had reached regarding the origin of the phone call that had been made to Palace Guard Robert Halton in the early hours of April the 27th. That call, as the investigation had established, had been traced back to the private residential wing used by Queen Camilla within Buckingham Palace. Charles presented this information calmly and without theatrics. Sources familiar with the meeting described his manner as composed and deliberate, the manner of someone who had spent time preparing for a conversation he had not wanted to have. Camilla listened to everything that was set out before her. When she spoke, her voice was described as steady. She did not deny the core of what had been presented. Instead, she offered an explanation, and the explanation she gave was one that reframed the actions in question not as misconduct, but as a form of protection. Regarding the sapphire Jubilee brooch, she stated that the item had been verbally promised to her years earlier during a private conversation with Queen Elizabeth II. She rejected the characterization of what had happened as theft. In her account, she had not taken something that did not belong to her. She had retrieved something she believed had already been set aside for her, based on a promise made in private by the late Queen herself. That explanation, whatever its merits, raised its own complications. Private assurances and informal promises, however sincerely made, do not carry legal weight when it comes to items held within the royal collection. The framework governing those possessions exists precisely to prevent situations where personal conversations and unrecorded agreements are used to justify the movement of historically significant objects. The fact that no written record of any such promise existed meant that Camilla's account, even if entirely truthful, could not be verified. And in the absence of verification, the legal and constitutional position was clear. The brooch had been removed from a secured vault without authorization, and the manner in which that removal had been arranged through a late-night phone call to a palace guard was difficult to reconcile with any straightforward notion of acting in good faith. The discussion then turned to the journals, and it was here that the atmosphere in the room became notably more tense. Camilla acknowledged that she had removed the journals from the vault, but her reasoning, as she presented it, was not motivated by personal gain or a desire to possess the writings for herself. Instead, she explained that she had acted out of concern about what the journals might contain. According to her account, she had reason to believe that Queen Elizabeth II had recorded doubts and concerns about the future direction of the monarchy during the difficult period of the global lockdown. Camilla's argument was that if those reflections were eventually read without the context needed to interpret them properly, they could create instability or controversy for the institution. By removing the journals early, she maintained, she had been trying to protect the monarchy rather than undermine it. In her own framing, the act had been one of loyalty to her husband's reign and to the long-term interests of the crown. The reaction from others in the room was immediate and visible. Prince William, according to sources present, showed a clear physical response to what he was hearing. Princess Anne's expression hardened as Camilla's explanation unfolded. The reasoning being offered did not land as mitigation. It landed as a confirmation that the actions taken had been deliberate, considered, and executed outside every established rule that governed the handling of royal possessions. The argument that removing historic items from a secured vault in the middle of the night could be justified as an act of protection was not one that the room found persuasive. If anything, it deepened the concern rather than alleviating it. King Charles rose from his chair to respond. Those who were present later described the moment as one in which the full weight of his position and his responsibilities was visible in a way that went beyond ordinary composure. He acknowledged the reasoning Camilla had offered. He did not dismiss it without consideration, but he made clear in terms that were precise and unambiguous that the reasoning did not hold within the legal and constitutional framework that governed these matters. The rules protecting Queen Elizabeth II's personal belongings and private writings were not informal guidelines open to individual interpretation. They were binding, and they existed for reasons that went beyond the preferences or judgments of any single person, regardless of who that person was or what their intentions had been. He addressed the pearl necklace, the brooch, and the journals in turn. None of those items, he stated, had been available for removal under any circumstances short of the official procedures that the Royal Collection Trust existed to uphold, not based on a remembered private conversation and not based on a personal assessment of what might or might not be politically sensitive decades in the future. He said directly that private promises, however genuinely recalled, could not override established law. And he made the point that arranging late-night vault access through an intermediary, regardless of the justification offered, was not a procedure that any member of the royal household had the authority to set in motion unilaterally. The silence that followed was described by those present as profound. No one in the room attempted to interrupt or argue against what had been said. What Charles delivered next was not a threat or a warning. It was a decision, stated clearly and without ambiguity. Effective immediately, Queen Camilla would be removed from her ceremonial duties. Her military titles would be stripped, her public engagements would be suspended indefinitely, and she would no longer hold any authority connected to royal events or the official representation of the crown. Beyond that, he stated that Camilla would hold no future claim over any royal property connected to Queen Elizabeth II's personal collection, and that no member of her extended family would gain any rights to those items. He closed with a statement that sources described as settling over the room with considerable weight. The monarchy, he said, survives through service and trust. When that trust is broken from within the palace walls, the strength of the crown is placed at risk. It was a sentence that carried the full authority of his position, and it made clear that the decision he had just delivered was final. There was no room for appeal or further discussion. Charles had made his judgment, and he had done so as a king rather than as a husband. No one in the room spoke against it. No one offered a counter-argument or asked for more time to consider alternatives. The meeting ended with the understanding that a decision of historic significance had just been made. Not in public, not under the pressure of media scrutiny, but behind closed doors in the presence of the senior members of the royal family, in a room where the weight of institutional responsibility had ultimately proved stronger than personal loyalty. For King Charles, it was a moment that demonstrated something that many monarchs across history have been forced to confront: that the crown and the person who wears it are not always able to want the same thing at the same time. The morning after a decision of that magnitude tends to feel different from ordinary mornings. There is a particular quality to the silence that follows a major institutional rupture, a kind of stillness that is not peaceful but loaded, as though the air itself has absorbed the tension of what has just taken place and has not yet found a way to release it. That was the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace on the morning of Monday, the 15th of May, 2025. Staff moved through the corridors with a quietness that went beyond their usual professionalism. Conversations were shorter than normal, People were careful about what they said and where they said it. Everyone who worked within those walls understood, even without being told the full details, that something significant had shifted and that the institution they served had just passed through. A moment it would not quickly forget. Outside the palace gates, London was doing what London always does. Traffic moved along the surrounding roads, tourists gathered near the railings with cameras and guidebooks, and the ordinary rhythm of a Monday morning in one of the world's most visited cities continued without interruption. The people moving through St. James's Park or catching the tube to work had no particular reason to believe that anything unusual had taken place. The palace presented the same face to the outside world that it always does, composed, dignified, and largely unreadable. That is one of the things the British monarchy has always been exceptionally good at. Whatever happens behind those walls, the outward appearance of continuity is maintained with a discipline that most organizations would find very difficult to match. But behind that outward appearance, significant changes were already being set in motion. In the early hours of that Monday morning, Queen Camilla departed Buckingham Palace. She was moved with the discretion that the palace applies to sensitive internal matters to Ray Mill House, her private residence in Wiltshire. The transition was handled quietly. A small security detail accompanied her, as would be standard procedure. There was no public announcement made at the palace gates, no visible farewell, and no ceremony of any kind to mark the departure. For an institution in which ceremony accompanies almost every significant moment, the complete absence of it on this occasion was itself communicating something. This was not a transition being managed for public consumption. It was a consequence being implemented without fanfare. The practical effects of the decision made in the war room the previous afternoon began to materialize almost immediately. Camilla's name was removed from the Royal Circular, which is the official record that lists members of the royal family who are carrying out engagements on behalf of the Crown. Upcoming public appearances that had been scheduled for the coming weeks and months were quietly withdrawn from internal calendars. Within 72 hours of her departure from the palace, charities and organizations connected to her patronages received formal correspondence informing them that their royal associations would be subject to review. In several cases, those partnerships were placed on immediate suspension. The language used in the letters was careful and measured, as it invariably is in official royal communications. But the meaning behind the careful language was not difficult to interpret. A significant and apparently open-ended change had taken place. The evening before Camilla's departure at 9 o'clock, precisely King Charles had addressed the nation in a pre-recorded broadcast delivered from his private study. He sat behind his mahogany desk with the royal crest visible behind him, and he spoke in a manner that was calm and measured while carrying an unmistakable weight. He confirmed that items belonging to Queen Elizabeth II's personal collection that had been reported missing had been successfully recovered. He acknowledged that a member of his household had faced consequences under the royal code. He did not name Camilla during the broadcast. In the tradition of the monarchy, the message was communicated through careful, deliberate language that said precisely what it needed to say without going further than was necessary. For those paying close attention, the statement was entirely clear. For the wider public, it prompted immediate and intense speculation. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, news networks interrupted their regular programming to report on what had been said and what it might mean. Commentators debated the implications throughout the evening. Some framed the decision as a demonstration of accountability, an indication that the monarchy was willing to hold even its most senior members to the same standards that governed everyone else operating within the institution. Others approached it as a deeply human story, a marriage tested beyond its limits by the demands of public life and institutional duty, and found it difficult to discuss without acknowledging the personal tragedy embedded within the official language. Social media, predictably, was immediate and overwhelming in its response. Shock, disbelief, and strong opinions appeared in enormous volume within the first hour. Many people who had watched Camilla gradually earn a degree of public acceptance over the years, after a long period in which that acceptance had been far from guaranteed, found the speed of what had happened difficult to process. A role that had taken a very long time to establish had, in the space of a single day, been suspended from public life entirely. Inside the palace, the days that followed were described by those familiar with the situation as unusually subdued. The departure of a familiar presence from a household that operates on routine and continuity is always felt, regardless of the circumstances surrounding it. Prince William remained close to his father during those days, and his steady presence beside the king was noted by those within the household as a visible signal of stability at a moment when the institution needed to project exactly that. Princess Anne maintained her public schedule and her characteristic composure, reinforcing in her own way the message that the work of the monarchy continued regardless of internal difficulties. The institution, whatever it was absorbing internally, was not going to allow itself to be seen as paralyzed. For King Charles, the days after the decision brought something that those close to him described not as relief but as a particular kind of finality. He had made a choice that any person in his position would have found extraordinarily difficult. He had chosen to protect the institution he leads over the person he is married to. The sapphire brooch had been returned to the royal collection. The pearl necklace had been recovered and secured. The journals had been returned to the vault and sealed once more, this time under significantly enhanced security measures. New digital access codes had been implemented. Those codes were known to only two people, King Charles himself and his heir, Prince William. The reinforced vault doors had closed again, and the mechanisms of security that governed access to the treasury had been tightened in ways that went beyond anything previously in place. Yet the securing of the vault and the recovery of the missing items did not resolve everything that the events of those 2 weeks had raised. If anything, it was the question of the journals that continued to sit most heavily in the minds of those who knew the full details of what had happened. The brooch and the necklace, however historically significant, existed within a framework that people could at least understand in relatively concrete terms. They were physical objects with established legal protections, and the fact that they had been removed and recovered could be processed within that framework. The journals were something different. They were the private voice of a person who had led the country through 7 decades of its history, recorded during a period of isolation and uncertainty, and sealed away with the explicit intention that they should not be read until the world had changed sufficiently for their contents to be understood in proper historical context. Camilla had claimed during the War Room confrontation that she had removed the journals because she feared what they might contain. She had suggested that Queen Elizabeth II had recorded doubts and concerns about the future of the monarchy during the lockdown period, and that those reflections, if read decades later without sufficient context, could create instability or controversy. What that explanation left unanswered, and what continued to generate quiet speculation among those aware of the details, was a question that had no clear resolution. Had Camilla actually read any part of the journals before they were taken away by investigators, or had she acted on assumption alone, removing writings she had never opened because of what she feared might be inside them? The answer to that question mattered, not only in terms of understanding her motivation, but in terms of understanding what, if anything, had been compromised beyond the act of removal itself. Sir Clement Meister personally oversaw the return of the journals to the vault once their authenticity had been confirmed and the investigation had reached its conclusions. The writings were placed back into secure storage, and the vault was sealed under the new security arrangements. Their official opening, under the rules of the Royal Collection Trust, would not take place until well into the next century, with the year 2122 cited by sources as the point at which the century-long protection would expire. The people who will eventually open those journals and read what is inside them have not yet been born. They will have no personal memory of the events of May 2025 and no emotional connection to the people involved. They will read the late Queen's words as history, which is precisely what she intended. For the present, those words remain sealed and silent behind reinforced steel doors in the basement of Buckingham Palace. The corridors above them have returned to something resembling their normal rhythm. Ceremonies continue. Public engagements are carried out. The machinery of the monarchy, which has survived considerably more than this over the course of its long history, keeps moving. But the events of those 11 days between the 4th and the 15th of May 2025 have left a mark that will not quickly fade. They raised questions about trust within the institution, about the limits of personal loyalty when it comes into conflict with constitutional duty, and about what it actually means to protect something you believe in when the cost of that protection turns out to be higher than you anticipated. Outside the palace gates, life in London continues as it always has. People go about their days largely unaware of the details of what took place inside those walls. But somewhere beneath the surface of the public story that has emerged, behind the carefully worded official statements and the measured broadcast addresses, there is a more personal and more complicated truth. A king made a decision that no person in his position would have made lightly. A vault was sealed. A set of journals continues to wait in the dark for a generation that does not yet exist. And the question that many observers have been left to sit with, one that may not have a definitive answer, is whether what happened was an act of institutional strength or simply the hardest thing that a man in an impossible position felt he had no choice but to do.